Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders episode 42. We are looking forward to having an amazing discussion about all the different types of property management markets that are out there, all the genres, and what's unique to each of them. So we'd like to welcome back to our show, as always, Kathy Williams. Kathy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jonathan. And, this is a topic that we don't talk very much about, but I think it's important because, as we all know, the employees in that housing industry tend to move around a lot. So you can learn fair housing for the property you're working for. But if you move markets to work for your next property, there might be some unique challenges there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is a very timely episode. As we know, there's just so much to learn and so many unique things to each of those housing markets. So can you give us kind of a summary, Kathy? Like, what are the different markets that are out there? What are some that you've worked with?
Sure. Well, we begin with kind of the broad overview of what we call private or market rate housing.
Mhm.
And that is probably the majority of apartments that are out there. And the Fair Housing Act applies to that entire market in pretty direct ways. So the training you get is usually focused on that market. Well, then we change markets a little bit and we go into what we might call the subsidized market, meaning that the federal government provides funds to reduce the amount of rent that a resident pays. And because the federal government is involved, there are all kinds of additional federal requirements on top of the federal and
Right.
state Fair Housing Act requirements. For instance, a landlord doesn't have to pay the costs of reasonable modifications in private market housing, but landlords do have to pay the costs for modifications if necessary because of a disability in subsidized apartments. So that's just one very important difference. Another type of housing is what we call low income tax credit housing. Now, that housing usually takes on the fair housing features of private market housing,
Mhm.
except if the state housing finance agency has added some requirements, and many do, that might affect how a landlord handles a reasonable accommodation, for instance. And also, if there's a reality that low-income tax credit housing might face a very and even more serious result of a finding of a fair housing violation. So that's a difference that has to be taken into consideration whenever those landlords are litigating a fair housing case.
Right. Right.
Another market, I'll just continue with a couple more, is senior housing. And that has all kinds of very challenging fair housing consequences. And that's why Fair Housing Institute has done an entire training module on senior housing because of all the unique fair housing challenges faced by those housing providers. A couple more housing markets that I can think of is the manufactured home markets. And that carries some difficulties because of the fact that of the various ownership and rental relationships that go on in that kind of housing. That can confuse people sometimes so that they think they're not covered by the Fair Housing Act or various parts like reasonable accommodation, when in reality they are. And there's been a lot of violations because of that misunderstanding.
Right.
And finally, kind of a very rare, unique, but important type of housing is what I would call supportive housing. And that is housing that was created to meet not just the housing needs, but other needs of people with disabilities, or for instance, women who are the victims of domestic violence, housing that puts together not just the bricks and mortar of housing, but also supportive services. And again, because of that combination, sometimes unique fair housing questions can arise. So I know that's a lot, but I basically covered, I think, what are the main property management markets out there.
Right. Well, let's just recap them. Let's recap them for our audience here. So I had down on my list, we covered senior housing, government subsidized. It's a big list. Low income tax credit housing, public housing, right? We covered that one.
Yeah, you know what? I forgot to even mention that. That's
public
right.
housing. Okay, let's talk about public housing. Then I'll keep going down the list. So what's unique about public housing also?
Public housing is kind of its own type of housing. So it has government requirements because it is federally subsidized. And then it also has additional requirements made by HUD on public housing agencies that don't necessarily exist for private landlords. So people that work in that area have to know about all of those requirements.
Okay. All right, good. So senior housing, government subsidized, single family, low income tax credit, public housing, supportive housing, manufactured housing. And did we talk about student housing? I think we
you know what? We didn't. Thank
you.
Let's do that. You're
one
reminding me of my list. Student housing is gotten to be a huge industry, employs lots of people, is very profitable for most of the investors who own those properties. But because in student housing, you're often putting people together in a roommate situation, a lot of fair housing questions arise for the owner and management of that property. And what responsibility do they have for the discrimination that might occur on the roommate to roommate basis? So there, again, because of that, we have created an entire course for student housing providers because of all those differences.
Right. Right. Very good. Yeah, there's a lot there. And it's just amazing. Like you mentioned in the beginning, even with the basics, the fundamentals of fair housing, there's so many unique nuances. And in talking to different people who have been in the industry for a long time, they share that. They've shared it with you. I've heard that same experience. So now for our audience, it leads us to a really important question. You know, why is it so important to understand the unique, like, nuances, differences, challenges that occur at each of these different types of housing sectors? What would your thought be on that, Kathy?
I think it is important to take into consideration why that housing market is different than others, and how, because of those differences, fair housing challenges may pop up in a different form than in a different market. And if you don't train your employees to be aware and sensitive of those areas, they can blunder right through them, and in doing so, violate fair housing requirements because they just didn't see it coming at them because of the type of housing that is presented. So let me just give you an example. In senior housing, everyone, I think, knows that you have to provide reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. The unique aspect of senior housing is almost all residents are going to be able to show, if they need to, that they have a disability. And thinking about how to reasonably accommodate, for instance, residents who might have Alzheimer's or memory impairment. What are the unique requirements to provide a reasonable accommodation to a resident with that kind of mental disability is both challenging but absolutely necessary.
Very good. That's awesome. And so would you say, Kathy, like I was thinking of property management companies that have mixed portfolios, there's some that they are very specific with the type of housing market that they have in their portfolio, but there are many out there that have a great mixture of them. And often we talk about on this show, besides doing online training, is make sure you have fair housing training in person, like doing role playing, doing some team exercises and so on. So would you agree that like even on that level, to your point specifically, that if you're a fair housing trainer in-house working with your team to make sure that they see the application for that housing market as part of their fair housing exercises or training, is that accurate?
Jonathan, that is a terrific point. That's where those unique challenges should be addressed, because let's face it, if you're getting just basic fair housing training that you're giving to all your employees, that is normally not going to address those unique challenges. So you better take the opportunity through role playing, through examples, through scenarios to apply fair housing to your residents and the unique fair housing challenges that might be presented.
Okay, very good. Yeah, thank you for that statement. So for our audience, super, super important. Don't just have a cookie cutter approach, but make sure that your team understands what they're going to be faced with if they are managing, multiple different types of properties. So excellent conversation for today's episode. It's also one of the things that as the Fair Housing Institute, we're very proud to bring to our community, not only shows like this that really highlight all the different genres of housing markets that are out there. You can search them on YouTube and search for them on our website, but also within our course catalog too, our Beyond the Basics. We already have the student housing course, as you mentioned, Kathy, as well as our senior course, and more coming. One thing we want to highlight to our audience too is the importance of signing up for our newsletter. There are so many ways that you can get involved. We would like your feedback. We want your questions. There are other things that are only available through our newsletter that if you sign up for, you'll be able to have access to. So if you haven't done it already, make sure you go to our website. There's a special page for our newsletter. The link will be in the show notes also, so that you can be part of that community and always be notified about new things that we're putting out for the fair housing, for our fair housing community. So we appreciate your support in that way. So that leads us to one of our favorite segments of our show as we're rolling out here in 2022, and it's the Fair Housing Fast Five. It's our Fair Housing Fast Five, where we put Kathy on the spot, see if she can answer 5 questions in 60 seconds or less. And we know how hard that is because we're talking about fair housing, and these aren't just simple yes, no questions, although sometimes they could be. But we know we've talked about some of this stuff during the show. So Kathy, are you ready?
Okay, Jonathan, I'm going to take a big breath and be ready to answer your questions.
All right, let me get my stopwatch ready. Okay, does the Fair Housing Act apply differently based on the type of housing involved in an alleged violation?
No, it doesn't. It's still the same Fair Housing Act.
Very good. Can a landlord evict a resident in senior housing if the resident has dementia?
Not because of the dementia. It would have to be because of the behavior that might result from the dementia violating the lease.
In student housing, can a resident refuse to live with a roommate due to the roommate's race?
The answer to that is no.
Is it true that one of the biggest differences between private market and subsidized housing is that the landlord must pay for reasonable modifications?
The answer to that is yes. That is one of the big differences.
In a single family housing or manufactured housing, since an individual house is involved instead of an apartment, can the landlord refuse to permit modifications as a reasonable accommodation?
And the answer is no. All landlords have to permit reasonable modifications.
So close again, Kathy. So close again. You know what's amazing? I think the questions are actually longer than the answers.
Yeah, I think they are too. Yeah.
But that was really, really good. But looks like about 72 seconds or so. So just over a
Oh,
minute. No grand prize again for you today.
I'll keep working on it.
Oh, but that's a lot of fun. Great way for our audience to be able to get a nice recap on what we've talked about today. This has been episode 42. We thank you for joining our community, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Take care, everyone.